Royal Institution Christmas Lectures, Lecture 6, Catastrophe and Psychology. 20 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
Catastrophe theory is a new mathematical method of modeling invented about 10 years ago by the famous French mathematician René Thom. And much of my own research in the last few years has been in this field. And it's especially useful for situations in which you get gradually changing forces producing discontinuous effects. I mean, normally one would expect continuous causes to produce continuous effects. And when they don't, it's something of a surprise. I mean, you expect continuous things to behave continuously rather than discretely. And if this surprise is nasty, you're liable to call it a catastrophe, and that's why the subject has the name. Well, I've made a small model here to illustrate this, a continuous force producing a discontinuous effect. It's very simple. It's just made of a disc of cardboard pivoted at the center, and at one point on the perimeter there are a couple of elastic bands attached, and the other end of one of the elastic bands is fixed, and where I hold the other end of the other elastic band is called the control point. And I can move it either up or down or from side to side. So I've got two controls, or if you like, a two-dimensional control space, which is this plane. Now, the behavior of the disk we can measure by the angle that this red line is to the vertical. So if I call that angle x, then the x is the behavior variable. So this is the control, and that's the behavior. As you can see, I operate the control smoothly, and the behavior responds smoothly. This is a nice little machine. You can make a little one when you get home. If you want to make one at home, the diameter of the disk is about the same as the unstretched elastic bands, and the distance here is about twice that. But who would like to come and play with this one here now? Okay, why don't you come? See, so you take the control point and put one finger around it so you've got a nice, well-defined space. Okay, now you move it gently up and down, you see, gently and gradually, and the behavior responds smoothly. Now, start about here and come towards me very gently. There, it made a jerk. You didn't expect that, did you? Okay, now go along a horizontal line, gently. That made a jerk at quite a different place, didn't it? Well, what it's like magnet. Have you ever made a magnet? No. Well, you get a bit of metal, and you put it in a magnetic field, and you gradually increase the field, and nothing happens until all of a sudden something happens. It suddenly becomes a magnet. And then you reduce the magnetic field again, and it stays a magnet. It resists. So you put on the opposite field, and it still stays a magnet until you get to a point here, when suddenly it becomes the opposite magnet. And that's called the hysteresis of magnetism, the resistance to change. And the same with this. When it jumps here, when it goes this way, and there, when it goes that way, we call hysteresis. Have you ever met that word before? Hysteresis. Okay, we'll try again. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to try and plot the point where it jumps. So make it jump here. So we'll put a little cross. Okay, go over there. We'll put a little cross. Now down here, move it across, that's right. A jump there, now over there, one there. You see, we could do that quite easily, so we could build up a whole set of points where it jumps. Well, I've already drawn that, so let's put it on here. Can you help me? You can let go there now. So we'll pop this on. See, you line it up, so it's just level with there, and it should be level with there, right in the middle. And then squeeze that bit on there, and okay. Now, that's it. Well, thank you very much. This black diamond-shaped curve with concave edges and 4 very sharp points, which we call cusp points, they're called cusps. This black curve is called the bifurcation set, because that's where the behavior bifurcates. You see, now, if we go in one side and then out the other side, it'll always jump as we go out. If we go out and the top, it'll jump across the top. And if we go out of the bottom, it'll jump across the bottom. And if we go all the way around without crossing any of the black lines at all, you see it responds perfectly smoothly. Now, that's a very surprising behavior for such a simple little machine. So what I want to do is to try and explain that behavior in terms of a picture. And then I will state a theorem which says that this picture is in a certain sense universal. And then we can take this picture and go into all sorts of different branches of science and make models. So that's the program. But before I explain the picture, I must explain a little bit about energy. You see, if you calculate the energy in the elastic bands, what I want to do is I want to fix a control point outside there, keep that absolutely fixed. You see, and then I can alter this angle x here, and there is exactly one equilibrium point where the energy in the elastic is minimum. See, the disk will respond by going to the point where there's minimum of energy. So when I draw the corresponding energy graph here, you see, up is energy, and long is at angle x. The energy graph will have exactly one minimum, below which I put a little red point. Now, supposing we held the control point in the middle of the cusp, in the middle of this black bifurcation set, then it's quite different, because there's a minimum of energy there and another minimum of energy there, stable equilibrium position, and they're separated by an unstable position of equilibrium in the middle, which, if I tilt slightly, flicks into one or other of the two stable equilibria. So now the corresponding energy graph will then look like a W. It will have two minima separated by a maximum. So underneath the two minima, I've put two little red spots, and underneath the maximum, the unstable equilibrium, I've put a little blue spot. And now I want to convert that into a cause-effect graph. You see, our control space is the cause, and our behavior variable is the effect. And so I want to draw a cause-effect graph. Well, the first thing to notice is that our control space is two-dimensional. So I shouldn't really have a line along here. Instead of a horizontal line, I should have a whole horizontal plane. So let's put in a whole horizontal plane there with the cusp in. You see, what I've done is I've taken a little piece of this control space with the cusp in, and I've taken it out, and I've transferred it across, and you have to imagine that sticking horizontally out of the screen. See? Now, the next thing to do is to select myself a control point there outside the cusp, and then I go to my energy graph, and I see there's on that energy graph, there's a unique red point. So I bring it along here, this is my x-axis, and I put it above there, and just about, oh, stop rolling along, pen. Just about there, where my finger is the red spot. So above that point, I'll put a red spot vertically above this control point to indicate the graph. I'm trying to build up the equilibrium points above there. And now we take an energy point, a control point inside the bifurcation set, and I've got two red spots separated by a blue spot. So this time, when I put, say, an control point there, above that now, on that line, I've got to have two red spots separated by a blue spot. So I'll draw those in. Two red spots separated by a blue spot. Well, we could go on doing this for every single point in the control space, and you see what we're going to do is build up a surface of points. Well, I'll now give you the answer. This is what the surface looks like. You see, where that red spot was has now become a whole surface of stable equilibria. And where that blue spot was has now become a whole surface of unstable equilibria, all under there. And where these two red spots has become another sheet of stable equilibria. And so what we've got is a surface which is red and folds round to blue and folds round to red again. At the back, it's just continuous red, but at the front, it develops a sort of pleat. Now, there are some special points on this red surface, and those are the points where the red folds into the blue. Those are singular points, and so we call those fold singularities, because if I project the surface down onto the control space, the surface gets folded exactly above the bifurcation set. So that's what the bifurcation set really is. It's the projection of this fold curve down onto the base where the red changes into the blue. And similarly, the other side, where the blue changes back into the red again, that projects down onto the other side. So all along that fold curve, those are singular points called fold singularities. Now, at the pleat point itself, you get something, a more complicated type of singularity, so we call that a cusp singularity, because when we project that down, that goes onto the cusp point. Now, I can explain the behavior of the machine, because supposing I move the control point slowly along the back here, then the behavior will respond smoothly without any jumps. But if I move the control point slowly along the front here, then what will happen is the behavior will follow smoothly along nice stable equilibrium, but when it gets to the right-hand side of the cusp there, at that point, the equilibrium breaks down because the only equilibrium left is this one on the top. So the machine has to do a catastrophic little jump up onto the top surface. Now, when I get up here, if I move the control back, then the behavior responds, and it passes that point without noticing any change because it's held stably on the top surface. And it comes along until it gets to the left-hand side of the cusp. And at that point, the stability of the top equilibrium breaks down, and it jumps catastrophically down onto the bottom surface again. You see, so that explains why you get the hysteresis. So let me just check that on the catastrophe machine. If we go along from the left, we're on the bottom surface, and we stay on the bottom surface until we get to the right-hand side of the cusp, and at that point, we have to jump up onto the top surface. Now we're on the top surface, and we come back. We remain on the top surface, quite happily, on the top surface until we get to the left-hand side of the cusp, and then we jump down onto the bottom surface again. Well, now, it would be nice if we could take a three-dimensional look at this surface. If we could look at this surface from the side there, put our eye here, and see that it was a smooth surface from the side, and then bring our eye around here until we got this view of it, and then take our eye over the top and look down, because we should be able to see the cusp. Well, that's exactly what I want to do, because made a little model here out of cotton stretched across a small perspex cube. And now you can see the surface is quite smooth. And so I'll turn it round slightly, and you're beginning to see that S shape come towards the front. And now you're beginning to see it move into the shape that I drew on the overhead projector just now. You're now beginning to see the three surfaces. You see there's the top surface here, and the middle surface there, and the bottom surface underneath. And now we'll rove over and get our eye looking down from the top. And when we look down from the top, you will be able to see the cusp there. Now we're looking down from the top, and you can see the cusp shape completely. And see there are three surfaces in the middle of the cusp. And outside the cusp, there's just a single surface. Okay. Now, we've got actually a big model of the surface, a solid three-dimensional surface. So I'd like someone to come and help me put someone from over here. You in the whites, that's right, you. I've got some arrows here to represent those hysteresis jumps. You see, and we've got this big surface here, and so if it can swivel round, and now you see we're looking, these are the stable top and bottom sheets, and this is the middle unstable sheet, which we're looking at from underneath this time. In that picture, we were looking at it from the top. But if we turn it round here like this, what I want to do is for you to look and stick these arrows on. Supposing we did this hysteresis as we go along from the left here to that point, and then when we get there, an arrow jumps up. So you come across there, and this is the arrow to go that side. Can you stick that on at the right place? That's right. We'll stick it on. It should fit exactly on, if we had a bit of luck. Can you press the bottom? Okay, that's firmly on. Good. So that's the hysteresis. When we go that way, it jumps at that end. And now, when you come back the other way, where does it jump?
There.
Where? There. And where does it jump to? There. That's correct. So let's stick the arrow on. Very good. Good. So now we've got the two arrows stuck on. Right. Thank you very much. Well, now we've made the picture and seen what it looks like, I now want to state the theorem of Tom concerning this picture. This is about 1968. He proved this theorem. Now, we start with a hypothesis, these three hypotheses. We assume we've got n behavior variables. Now, in this machine here, we just had one behavior variable, just the angle, x. But if we wanted to make a model of the economy of the country, we might want to take 1,000 variables. I mean, the price of coal, the price of steel, the inflation rate, the unemployment, the deficit in international exchange, and so forth. To make a realistic economy model of the economy of the country, you might need 1,000 variables. And if you're doing embryology, then you might need 10,000 variables, because you might need to describe the state of a cell to measure the concentrations of the 10,000 different proteins in the cell. Or if you were making a model of the brain, then you might need 10,000 million variables to measure the rates of firing of all the neurons in the brain. So we want to allow ourselves the complexity of a very complicated system. Next, we assume we have two controls. Like we had in this little machine here, we have a two-dimensional control space. And lastly, we assume we have some minimizing principle. In here, what we did were the machine adapted itself to minimize the energy in the elastic bands. If we were doing light rays, then light takes the shortest path, the minimal path. If we were doing economics, we might minimize the cost. If you're studying animal behavior, animals behave so as to minimize stress. If you're studying evolution, then you maximize fitness. That's how species evolve, so as to maximize fitness, or if you like, minimize unfitness. So the whole principle of minimization is very common in science. So what I'm saying is these are very common hypotheses. And you might ask, what on earth could you get out of such very general hypotheses? Well, now, this is what we get out. This is the conclusion of the theorem. The first thing we get out is that the equilibria form a smooth surface. Now, already, this is very surprising, because supposing you have two-dimensional control space up here and 1,000 dimensions of behavior up here, you're working in 1,000 plus two-dimensional space, and already the mind begins to boggle, especially you've got all these equilibrium points up in 1,002 dimensions. But the theorem says, don't worry. Inside this 1,002 dimensions, there is sitting a nice, beautiful, ordinary surface of equilibria. So we can take it out of the 1,000 dimensions, chuck them away, and build a model of it, right here in our ordinary 3 dimensions, and look at it. So it'll be a surface just like this. Now, the next thing the theorem says, and this is, of course, the punchline of the theorem, says the only singular points are folds and cusps. So what it's saying is, when you project this surface down onto your control space again, all you're going to get is fold curves and cusp points. And of course, in this machine here, we had 4 cusp points. There may be many cusp points, but locally, around each cusp, that surface is the most complicated thing that you can get. And that's the astonishing result of Thom's theorem, that here we have the greatest complexity that you can have given this situation. So with this situation, then we can go and look at phenomena all over science. Now, the first one, we will take a nice classical example of a buckling beam in engineering. Over here, we've got a beam, and I'm going to subject it to 2 forces, a compression force at the ends here, and a load force we'll hang a bucket on. And what we're going to measure is its behavior, how much it buckles up. So the distance x is going to be the distance this buckles up from the horizontal when I compress it here and I load it down there. And of course, beams are used in architecture and houses and everything like that, and they're even used in toys. That's a buckling beam inside there. Well, now, first of all, I must explain how x depends upon the compression and the load. It's just another copy of this surface, the cusp singularity. You see, here are my 2 controls, load here and compression. And here is the effect, the displacement, x. And if I don't compress it, then it'll just go down gently when I load it, or gently up if I push it upwards. But if I compress it, then that stops it being horizontal at all. It must either be buckled up or buckled down. So let's imagine doing an experiment. What we'll do is first, we'll start with the thing as it is, uncompressed and unloaded, and then first of all, we'll compress it and gradually increase the compression up to here, and when it's up there, we'll load it. See? So that's the gradual change of forces that we'll put on it. Now, what will be the corresponding behavior? As we compress it, it'll stay horizontal until it reaches just near the cusp point, and then all of a sudden, it will begin to buckle upwards. Whether it buckles upwards or buckles downwards will depend marginally upon the manufacture of the beam, the imperfections in the manufacture, and our apparatus. And you will see I hung that little red weight this end to make sure that it just buckles upwards when we get to the crucial point. Now, the point at which it buckles up was actually found by Euler way back in 1744, but he didn't actually draw this picture then. Well, then it buckles upwards, and then when we begin to load it, it will remain buckled upwards in a nice stable position until we reach the left-hand side of the cusp, when it should catastrophically snap into the buckled downwards position, and then it will remain happily buckled downwards. So we will exhibit the catastrophic switch. And if we compress it even more, you see, before we load it, then because the cusp is getting wider and wider, then it ought to be able to carry much more load before it buckles downwards. So those are the experiments we will do. So who wants to come and do the experiment? How about you at the back there, okay? And someone right at the back there. How about you at the back there? And then, have I had you before? Okay, you come down that side. Now, so what you're going to do is you're going to compress it. So you're the compression man. Now, you're the observation man, so you stand here, and you're going to point at that point where it is. Have we got a pointer, Bill? Yeah. Ah, there it is. So you're going to point. Well, I'll tell you where to point with this pointer. You see, you point with your hand, and you're going to be the load lady. See, you'll load that when it comes necessary. So, okay, you're going to start with your finger there because we're unloaded and uncompressed. And so as we gradually compress it, you'll have to run your finger along there till we get to that point. You see, that's exactly a horizontal line running along there. Okay, start compressing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh, stop. Did you see it just beginning to go up? He must have got to the cusp point. So from now on, you've got to start going up the cusp point. Actual fact, this is a bit longer. You started probably around about here, so you go a bit faster now. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. I should think that's about enough. Shall we let the load lady take over? So we've got it compressed up to here. I think by now you're up to about there, you see. Okay, so it's your job now. You're going to load it. So we'll hang the bucket on, and there's some water. So pour the water in steadily. Gently. Well done. Okay, so you loaded up to about here, didn't you? Okay, compression man, let's push it up. When I push it up, you've got to go that way until you get the opposite catastrophe. That's right. Bonk. So now you're up on the top surface again. Compress it more. Come here. 2, 3, 4. I think about there is about enough. A bit more then. Okay, enough. Now you're practically at the front, right in the middle. Oh, that's right. You're already a bit loaded, aren't you? Okay, load her up, load lady. See, it can take a lot more load this time. The cusp must be getting pretty... Here's some more. That takes a lot more, doesn't it? You gave a half extra toe when I wasn't looking. There, well done. Thanks very much. Okay. Well, you saw, we only had 2 controls there. But what if we had 3 controls? I mean, what would the picture look like if we had 3? This, instead of being a plane now, would have to be 3 dimensions. So it's going to be a bit difficult to imagine. So we'll have to imagine our control space as a nice 3-dimensional part of our 3-dimensional space. And then somewhere, lurking in the mathematics above, is this equilibrium surface. You know, this rounded equilibrium surface somewhere above, which, when we project down into our control space, it will give us a bifurcation set. And instead of being a cusp made of curves, it'll be a 3-dimensional bifurcation set made of surfaces. And instead of having cusp points, it'll have whole cusped edges. And it'll also have 3 new types of singular point. So I'm now going to draw you pictures of those 3 new types of singular point. The first one is called the swallowtail. Here it is. It's a surface which is nice and smooth round here, but at the front it comes like that, has a cusped edge, and then another cusped edge, and then intersects itself along this line of self-intersection with the origin there. And this is called the swallowtail because when René Thom was trying to explain what this surface looked like to the blind French mathematician called Bernard Morin, the blind man was frowning, and suddenly he smiled and said, "Oh, you mean it looks like a swallowtail?" And so we thought this was such a good idea that it was named as a swallowtail. Now, the next one is the elliptic umbilic. And this has a concave triangle here with 3 cusps, which are joined by 3 parabolas to the origin and expand out again to another concave triangle. That's the elliptic umbilic. Now, the next one is even more complicated. Here, we have a smooth curve here, which evolves slowly and passes through that green right angle and then becomes a cusped edge here. At the same time, inside, there's a red cusp, which I've drawn red, which goes forward, cuts through the white one, and comes on the outside as a smooth curve. That's complicated. Well, I will now state Thom's more general theorem. The question he asks is, if you start with one control, then you only have one type of singularity, namely the fold. If you have 2 controls, then a new one appears, the cusp. If you have 3 controls, then 3 new ones appear, and those are the ones we've just looked at, the swallowtail and the hyperbolic and the elliptic umbilic. If you have 4 controls, 2 new ones appear, 5 controls, 4 new ones appear, and so on. And the Russian mathematician Vladimir Arnold has classified them up to about 20 dimensions, and some people are busy trying to get the whole list up to infinity. But what is so astonishing is the fewness of them. I mean, why should there be so few of them? And each one has its own very peculiar geometry, and we would never have guessed in a month of Sundays this geometry until Thom had proved his theorem. And it took Thom about 7 years to prove his theorem. He had to persuade colleagues in various other branches of mathematics to prove all the necessary sub-theorems to assemble into this big theorem. And it takes me about 30 lectures to 4th year mathematics students at university just to get through the proof of the theorem, just to give you an idea of the difficulty. Well, I won't go through the proof today. What I would like to do is to show you an example of this hyperbolic umbilic. And that is, we're going to look at caustics, light caustics. Does anybody know what light caustics are? Have you ever seen the flickery patterns on the bottom of the swimming pool made by the sun? Oh, well, those are light caustics. And similarly, sometimes when the sun reflects, the water reflects onto the underside of a bridge, you get flickery patterns. Those are light caustics. Another example is a rainbow. Another example, if you're drinking a cup of coffee in the sun, you will see a cusp on the surface of the coffee. Has anybody drunk a cup of coffee in the sun? You have? Okay. Well, why don't you come down and show the rest of those who haven't? Do you want to come down, show the cup of coffee in the sun? Okay. We've got too much coffee in here, I think. There isn't room. Have we got anything? We've got a little too much coffee in this cup, I think, Bill. I'm not going to drink that. Perhaps we can pour a little bit back in the jug. Oh, no, I've got too little. you pour out a cup of coffee. I'll tell you where to stop. I think it's about there. It's about there. There. Now, have we got a cusp? What we should have, you see, we've got the sun up here, and it's shining on the surface of the coffee there, in this coffee cup, and we should see, can you see a very faint cusp? Can you point out to it? That's it. That's it. Yes, very good. Now you know what to look at. the cusp points towards the sun. It's on the other side of the cup. It's actually the sunlight reflecting off this side of the cup. You see, if I put my finger there, it will should interrupt the cusp. Yes, there it is. Creates a shadow. Very good. Thanks very much. Well, here's a diagram showing you the sun's rays all coming together and reflecting off this side of the cusp and clustering up and forming that cusp, which is the caustic. See, now that's a bit confusing. They get all muddled up there. So what I'd like to do is to make a picture where I unfold them. That is to say, I pick each light ray as it's reflected out, I lift it off the picture a little bit and lift all of them off a little bit higher and a little bit higher. So in that way, I'll build a surface of rays. And it's exactly the same surface that we had before, namely this surface. As you can see them side by side. There's the surface on the cusp, and here's the cusp on the coffee, and here is the cusp made by this little surface. See, what I've done, I've lifted this up into 3 dimensions and then projected it back, and I get exactly the rays. And where this casts shadows and looks dark, in the coffee cup, it looks bright. And another thing you'll notice is that all the rays, all the lines in this picture actually lie on the inside of the cusp itself. And therefore, that's another little thing you can look at when you drink your coffee in the sun, that the cusp has a sharp edge on the outside and a soft edge on the inside. Another thing you look at, since there are 3 of these surfaces projected onto the inside, it should be 3 times as bright inside as it is outside. And that's a subtle point, because you remember in our previous example, the middle surface didn't count because it was unstable. Well, in light caustics, it does count, because light not only takes the shortest path, it also takes the longest path. So in this case, it's not only a minimizing principle, but a maximizing, a mini and maximizing principle. Well, now I want to go back and show you an example of the hyperbolic umbilic. You see, really, a light caustic is a 3-dimensional thing. It's above the surface of the coffee, you actually have a cusped edge of a surface. And so you have, in space itself, you have a surface where there's a concentration of photons. But the photons are all scudding along, each in its own direction, and so you never see them. You can only see a photon that actually scuds into your eye. So in order to actually see a caustic, you actually have to put a screen in the way, then the photons hit the screen and bounce off into your eye, and then you can see it. Well, in the case of the cup of coffee, it was actually the surface of the coffee which was the screen. Well, so what I want to do is, I've got an old searchlight mirror here from about 1912, and I've got using a point source of light, I will make, in this region of space here, a light caustic, a 3-dimensional light caustic. And then we'll take the screen here and get sections of it. So I could get sections of it by moving the screen backwards and forwards, but equivalently, I could keep the screen fixed and move the light source backwards and forwards. And that way, I'm going to get sections, and so what I should get is a cusp inside a curve, and then as I move it, the cusp should pierce through the curve and become a round outside a cusp. So that's what, hopefully, if I can possibly manage it. It's a bit tricky here, and I had a nice little piece of wood which I've lost. Not to worry. Isn't that it? Oh, no, I don't think it is. Now, can you see inside there's a little cusp, and outside is a long oval. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it a little bit, and you'll see the cusp going towards the oval, and at that moment it's piercing it, and it's coming on the outside now as a curve. Meanwhile, what was inside has gone to a little cusp. Now I'll go back, and you'll see that long oval, which has a cusp on the inside, is now piercing and going to a long oval curve on the outside. So the cusp inside goes to the curve on the outside. The curve on the outside goes to the cusp. And if you want to see more of them, then we go down here, and there I'll give you 4 of them. Well, the most striking development in the theory of light caustics recently has been made by Michael Berry of Bristol University, a physicist, and he's used all these singularities to explain the twinkling of stars. Here, you see, astronomers, when they measure objects in the sky, they're always having to measure intensity to find out whether they're galaxies or stars, and to find out how far away they are. So it's terribly important to them to actually get a precise measurement of intensity. But due to the irregularities of the Earth's atmosphere, all they receive is this tremendously wobbly message. You see, here's time, and here's the intensity that they're trying to measure, and they get this very, very wobbly message with occasionally a twinkle and a twinkle, see, and the best they can do is take the average. Now, it would be very satisfactory if we could understand why this twinkling took place a bit better. And what Berry has done is suggested that it may be due to caustics in a systematic way. So here is the night sky, and here's the starlight coming in from the star, all parallel, and there's your observatory there. You're trying to measure the intensity. Now, suppose there was on the top of the Earth's atmosphere a wave, a simple wave, something like that, going along in that direction. Well, the effect of the wave, of course I've exaggerated here, is to cause the rays to bend. And so this refraction produces cusps, these red cusps. See, and so as the wave moves along, you're looking up at the star, and as one of these bright cusps passes you, you suddenly get a twinkle, and then twinkle, see? And then there's a long period where nothing happens, and then as next one comes, twinkle, twinkle, you see? And you notice that a cusp has 2 sides, and so you always get twinkles in pairs. And that's, of course, why the poet wrote, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." Well, what Berry has done, he's said, well, if there's one wave, there's probably 1,000 waves, all going in different directions at different levels between air masses, inside air masses, pressure waves, and so on. And therefore, using the whole classification of all the singularities all the way up to infinity, he's managed to predict how the intensity depends on the actual wavelength of light. And he's made some very tight predictions, which the experimentalists are trying to measure at the moment. Now, here is water waves, and you can see we're using fluorescent in the water, and you can see the light actually flowing through the water, and if I move it to and fro, you can see that starlight is affected by the motion of the Earth's atmosphere, and you can see it moving to and fro as it would do if there were waves in the Earth's atmosphere. Well, before I leave caustics, you may have wondered why we use such a funny word as caustics, and that is because it comes from the Greek word to burn, and that is because heat rays operate the same reflection rules as light rays. And so what we're going to do now is an experiment to indicate heat rays. This is an experiment that was originated by Humphrey Davy, and he performed it in 1812 here in this building, at this very bench, with these very two mirrors here. And when there was above there, young Michael Faraday was sitting, who described it all in his lecture notes, and he put a heat source at the focus of this mirror, and then the heat rays were reflected into a vertical column to that mirror, and then re-reflected to the focus of that mirror, where we've put some gunpowder, and hopefully Thank you very much, Bill. I'd like to say we couldn't possibly have done that experiment with without the help of Mr. Bill Coates here, nor any of our experiments. And I think I'd like to ask if you would give a round of applause for Mr. Bill Coates. Well, now, I'd now like to turn to psychology, and I'd like to give an application of this cusp singularity to psychology. But before I do, I'd like to remind you of the 5 qualities that this surface, this universal surface, has. First of all, bimodality. For some control points, there are going to be 2 modes of behavior. Secondly, the catastrophic jumps occurring at different points, which we call hysteresis. Thirdly, if you're at the front of the graph, then you must either be on the top surface or on the bottom surface, and so this intermediate behavior is actually inaccessible to you. And fourthly, divergence. That is to say, if you come on 2 paths from the back to the front, and you pass one way to the left of the cusp and the other way to the right of the cusp, although your 2 control paths will be very close, nevertheless, your actual behavior will diverge, one onto the top surface and one onto the bottom. And this divergence is rather unexpected, because usually you think if you perturb the initial conditions slightly, then the ensuing motion will only be perturbed slightly. And fields like economics and meteorology and psychology, where a small perturbation of the initial conditions causes a big divergence in the behavior, were thought to be unmodelable, because nobody thought that where you had divergence, you could possibly model it. However, what we have seen is that this divergence is a very natural phenomenon, because this is a very natural surface. And not only that, it's intimately connected with these other qualities of bimodality, catastrophe, hysteresis, and inaccessibility. And therefore, if ever you come across some phenomenon in science where you see one of these qualities, then you should quickly check in your mind whether the other 4 are present. And if some of them are, then you should suspect very seriously there might be a cusp surface lurking in the background. You see, so that is how one should begin to use this type of modeling. And so I want to take a phrase from Konrad Lorenz's book on aggression, where he says, rage and fear are conflicting factors influencing aggression. You see, rage and fear are 2 drives, so these are going to be our 2 control factors. And the aggression is the measurement of how much, whether you're in a fighting mood or in a running away mood or moderate mood in between. Now, what does the word conflicting mean? The word conflicting mean is when rage and fear are both present, then you won't know whether to fight or run away. You see, so there's a sort of conflict within you. And therefore, if we're going to model this, and there's bimodality here, because there's the fight-flight bimodality. If we're going to model this by a cusp, I mean, because there's bimodality, we begin to suspect immediately there may be a cusp. We should have our coordinates of rage and fear so that the cusp should sit in between them, so that when you have both positive rage and fear, you've got this bimodality. So that's how we should begin our model. we've got two controls, rage and fear, and we've put them roughly about 45 degrees either side of the cusp, so that when we have positive coordinates of both rage and fear, then we have two modes of behavior. Of course, as usual, the middle surface doesn't count. And then up here, we're going to measure mood. And remember, we can use 1,000 dimensions if we want to measure all the subtleties of mood. But even if we do that, then we'll still get back a two-dimensional surface, which we can then begin to label with the types of mood. And for argument's sake, let's think of ourselves, let's think of a dog rather than ourselves yet. So at the back here, there will be neutral behavior, but if he's got rage only, he will go into a fight mood. And then if it's a medium amount, he'll begin to growl before he goes into fighting. If he's got fear only, he'll go into a flight mood. And before he gets there, he will start crossing the road, say, to avoid the danger. So now we've labeled the various possible things. We must check the other 5 qualities. Now, first of all, catastrophes. If the dog is in a flight mood, for example, he's cowering in the corner, and you begin to approach him, see, then you may invade his territory, and in so doing, you will send up his rage coordinate. And so, if he's here, being frightened, you'll send up his rage coordinate, so we'll come along here, and we will cross the cusp. That's not a very good color. I'll try this one here. We'll cross the cusp at this point, and as we go outside the cusp, then you will get, at this point, he will have this sudden catastrophic jump of switching from a flight mood into a fight mood. What I'm really talking about is that part of the brain which determines the mood that you're in. It's probably part of the limbic brain. And I'm talking about an oscillation in the limbic brain which determines the flight mood. And as you change the input, that is the rage drive a bit, the stability of that oscillation breaks down, and so that part of the brain flicks into another oscillation which underlies the fight mood. So what I'm doing is I'm giving a mechanical explanation in terms of oscillations of the brain of these subtle emotional reactions. So that's the purpose of the model. Now, similarly, if he's in a fight mood and you grip him by the throat, and then you may cause him his fear to rise, so he'll come back this way down and cross the cusp at that point, and then he will suffer the opposite catastrophe and switch into a flight mood, and then he will either lie down doggo or, as soon as the opportunity arises, disengage and run away. So the catastrophes are present. Moreover, they take place at different points, because you know very well from yourselves, moods persist. If you're feeling despondent and all your friends are nice to you, you may nevertheless remain despondent. And if you're cheerful and the world's absolute hell, nevertheless, for some unknown reason, you remain cheerful. You see, moods refuse to change. There's a sort of hysteresis effect in them. It's quite different to the other properties of the brain. I mean, visual perception or oral perception respond immediately. But moods don't. They delay. And so this is much more likely to be the type of mathematics you should use to model moods. All right, we've checked hysteresis. Now, inaccessibility. If he's at the front of the graph here, then a neutral behavior is inaccessible to him, and he'll have to be either in a fight or the flight mood. Next, the divergence. Well, if he first becomes angry and then frightened to here, he will become in a fight mood and stay in it up to there. But if he first becomes frightened and then angry, you see that was the other path, then he will go onto the bottom surface and there. So you'll have a divergence according to the order in which he suffered the drives. You see, although he finishes up with exactly the same coordinates of fear and rage, nevertheless, on the one case, he remains in a fight, and the other in a flight mood. So that means this model takes into account just the previous past history of the animal. Well, of course, how do we actually do an experiment to measure this? And Konrad Lorenz has actually suggested we can read off the coordinates of fear and rage on a dog's faces. And he draws in his book 9 little faces. Here is the ordinary, normal dog, and as he gets angry, the rage, his mouth opens, ready to bite you. And as he gets frightened, then the capillaries in the skin contract, sending the blood into the central reservoir for an emergency, and that pulls the ears back and the eyes slit and the mouth down. And so here is ears back, eyes slit, and the mouth down. And if he has both these coordinates, there he has his mouth open and his ears back. And so Lorenz suggests we can actually measure his fear by how his eyes are back and measure his rage by how much his mouth is open. So what we will do now, I need a volunteer to come and pin, why don't you come, and we will pin these dogs' faces on the actual, here. Now, where's our normal dog? Here's our normal dog. That's right. So pin him there and say he's facing over there. Ah, good. Now, here's, where's an angry, there's an angry dog. See, that's pure rage. So he's over there. Why don't you go around there? That's right. You go around there. Ready? Here's a frightened one. I'll put that one on for you. Now, where's this one? This is one rage and fear together.
So that will be there.
Yeah, and we've got another copy of him.
And that will be
Right on the bottom here. Now, this is the cusp. You see, this is about where the cusp will be. So what I want to do now is to put on the 2 crucial faces, these round ones, where he's actually going to jump catastrophically from one mood to the other. So this is the catastrophic jump up into the... So we want to put that one on here. So you stick that one on this arrow, and I'll stick this one on this arrow. That's the catastrophic jump down into the flight one. So we've stuck all the faces on. Thanks very much. Now, I've tried, of course, to get psychologists and animal behaviorists to do experiments on this, and they say, well, it'll take a lot of time, and it may be about 5 years to set up the apparatus. It'll be much easier to do it with lizards or fishes. You know, lizards, sometimes they go green and brown. They go green if they're feeling triumphant, and brown if they're feeling quelled. And you get 2 lizards approaching each other, flashing green and brown, and all of a sudden one will go green and the other will go brown. But the easy experiments to do are with your fellow humans. And so this is a picture of your opponent in an argument. You see, normal behavior is rational discussion. And as he goes into the attack, his arguments become irrational, then abusive, and finally he breaks into hysteria. Now, as he goes into defense, first of all, he concedes points, and then apologizes, and then bursts into tears. Well, if you say something that makes him a little bit angry and frightened, the first thing that you will do is you will deny him access to rational discussion. So he will oscillate with little catastrophes between irrational argument and conceding points, as anyone who's ever served on a committee will know. But now if you make him a little bit more angry and frightened, then you will rule out those. Those will no longer be accessible to him, and he will oscillate between abuse and apologies, as anybody who's been a teenager or a parent will know. And if you make him really angry and frightened, you'll rule out those 2, and all you'll leave him with is the opportunity of hysteria or tears. And the very verbal usage of hysterical tears confirms the catastrophic jump right from the top sheet down to the bottom sheet. Well, of course, if you really wanted to persuade him of something that's important, that you know will make him angry and frightened, the best thing to do is to state your case and then go away, because then his fear and rage will subside, and then he will go back to this point, and he'll be able to think about what you said rationally and realize it was not a bad idea after all. Well, what we have been doing is the question is what I have been doing scientific or not? It does make some predictions, which in future we hope will be tested. But the other thing it does is by deducing so many things from one hypothesis, we are reducing the arbitrariness of description. And that's the objective of science, to reduce the arbitrariness of description. Well, thank you for being such a nice audience.